friend there at the New York Post, A.G. Gankarski. He joins me. A.G., good to see you. Hope you had a good 4th of July here. I guess my first question, what do you hear when watching Biden there on the tarmac? What struck out to you? And also, how big is this ABC interview? How much is at stake?
Well, I'll take those questions in turn, Andrew, and thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, of course.
Regarding the first question, there was just way too much meta discourse in that. It was Biden talking about whether he can actually serve, whether he should be on a ticket, whether he has a succession plan. He took a page from Donald Trump's book, talked about some fake news, saying the media was wrong about their speculation. All of those are a bad look. And regarding his interview tonight with George Stephanopoulos, I mean, that's a layup. That's a pre-tape. If he can't acquit himself well there, if he can't make his case there, he's not going to have another opportunity. He spoke in Wisconsin today, had a few gaffes despite a teleprompter speech. Supposed to speak to the National Education Association, but that speech was canceled because of a strike in Philadelphia.
Right.
So a lot is riding in this interview. I don't know if it's going to, quiet the groundswell of questions about Biden. Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, he's looking to get Democratic senators basically engaged. And, this whole situation reminds me of Nixon 1974, when you had Republican senators telling him that it was time to go. But in this case, there's no Watergate. It's just they're saying that Biden lacks the capacity to continue on to a second term. This is stunning, and this is unprecedented as far as I know.
Yeah, so, AG, our viewers know, on Wednesday, Biden met with Democratic governors, virtually and in person. Everyone but Tony Evers there. Evers introducing him on the stage in Madison today. After that meeting, the alignment seemingly formed amongst those governors that the course would be remain. That's what they wanted to do. They didn't call for him to drop out. They acknowledged that it was a bad debate, and they said they're moving on. But we're getting a statement in from Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. She's a top Biden surrogate as well. She issued this statement today, 2 days after the meeting with the governors. She said this: President Biden saved our democracy in 2020 and has done an outstanding job over the last 4 years. I'm deeply grateful for his leadership, and I know he agrees this is the most important election in our lifetimes. She says the best way forward right now is a decision for the president to make. Over the coming days, I urge him to listen to the American people and carefully evaluate whether he remains our best hope to defeat Donald Trump. She says, whatever President Biden decides, I'm committed to doing everything in my power to defeat Donald Trump here. So are some of these governors hedging, AG?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, Massachusetts, that's a state that Democrats almost always win. So for the governor of that state to come out and say, well, maybe Biden should consider getting off the ticket, which is what she said and not in so many words, is telling. It basically speaks to the crisis of confidence that Democrats at all levels seem to have with the president right now. There are the reflexive defenders of him being on the ticket, but the real political calculus here is that if Biden stays on the ticket, it's going to have down ballot effects. It'll affect Senate races, it'll affect the House, it'll affect everything else. And the question until from now to November, if Biden stays in, is if Biden can do the job.
Yeah.
And that's not where Democrats want to be, obviously. They've wanted to turn this election to a referendum on Donald Trump and replay the 2020 playbook. But, in this case, with Biden's competency being an issue, and we talked about this on debate night, too. I mean, we talked so much about the style and the presentation of the president in the debate because it was so stunningly bad, especially that first third.
Yeah.
And, in retrospect, he blamed it on jet lag, blamed it on a cold, blamed it on being overprepared. But, whatever excuse he wants to use, he needed to stand and deliver in that moment, and he was unable to. And I don't think he's going to be able to erase that with these professional politicians who, Maura Healey and others, have political ambitions beyond where they're at now.
Yeah.
They see Biden as a liability, and it's hard to argue with that because he's not in a case where he's not in a place where he can present the contra case right.
AG, we want to talk about whether or not the Biden White House, the Biden campaign are on the same page about the explanations for Biden's debate performance. Remember, the president had been suffering from a cold. We were told that while the debate was happening, according to sources with the Biden campaign, to Fox. Now, I thought this was interesting because a White House spokesperson is confirming the president had a checkup in recent days in the wake of the cold after the debate performance. But the very nature of whether he was checked out by a doctor after the debate was called into question. Karine Jean-Pierre at a White House briefing earlier this week said the president hadn't had any medical exams since his annual physical in February. And then, according to Senior Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bates, he clarified and said several days later the president was seen to check on his cold and was recovering well. So it's just like very minor details like that. If you're not on the same page, they can blow up, can't they, into kind of macro storylines about the age and the senility.
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside the question of senility here, the fact that you've got multiple versions of a story of whether the president had a medical checkup is concerning. It suggests that there's not message discipline in between, people in the White House and the campaign. And yeah, the official side and the campaign side aren't supposed to coordinate. But lots of questions and lots of holes about that he has a cold story, including if he had a cold, why did he go to Waffle House a few hours after the debate and greet people? I mean, if you have a cold that necessitates a medical checkup, it's a bad look to be going to the Waffle House and dapping people the way President Biden was. So yeah, the story kind of unraveled, and the fact that there's multiple excuses, for the fact that he froze up. That when I watched that debate, it didn't look like he was battling a cold. It looked like he was dealing with kind of thing Mitch McConnell dealt with a few months back.
Sure.
The thing that is necessitating Republicans getting a new leader after this election.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean the dissembling, from the Biden camp is concerning. And it's just one piece of this puzzle. And yeah, we shouldn't be talking about whether the president is actually have a cold or not in July. I mean,
Right.
That's not where this campaign wanted to be.
Yeah, LiveNOW look there at the Capitol, AG. We're learning some more on these pieces of news and these stories that have come out in just the last couple of hours. This in the Washington Post, now confirmed there at Punch Bowl by Andrew Desiderio, saying Senator Mark Warner is putting together an effort for Dems to discuss in person when they're back in D.C. Monday Biden's viability at the top of the ticket and whether they should ask him to step aside. That's according to sources familiar with the conversation to Andrew there at Punch Bowl. We also are getting in as well, AG, from Kelly Ferris, senior Capitol Hill producer from Fox, that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is convening a virtual meeting Sunday afternoon with top committee Democrats. So this will not be a full Democratic caucus conference call, but it will encompass more members than the Democratic leadership call that occurred earlier this week. Kelly Ferris says a full Democratic caucus is scheduled to meet in person for their weekly meeting on Tuesday. This dovetails with the Democratic governors meeting just on Wednesday. So everybody's meeting, talking about the path forward. But if after those meetings, all of these Democratic leaders say, we're staying on this path, we're remaining with Biden, he's our guy, what's the point?
I don't think they're going to issue a statement ever that says President Biden get out of the race. That would be politically catastrophic. But what clearly is happening is, people, senators, people in the House are concerned. There were rumblings earlier this week about a letter from members of the House basically urging the president to get off the ticket. So they're not going to say the president can't run anymore, but they're going to say everything up until that point. And this is where Joe Biden, who's been in D.C. for half a century, should be able to read the room. He should recognize these signs. And, indeed, he's had to withdraw from campaigns before. We remember 1987 when he has plagiarism scandal, plagiarizing former UK politician Neil Kinnock. And, he rode that scandal out. But after a while, he just said, I see where things are at. I'm getting out of this race. It was very pragmatic. And I don't know if he has that gear right now. And another thing that concerns me about the decision making of the president is the fact that his wife, Dr. Joe Biden, and son Hunter Biden are in key advisory roles.
Sure.
This is kind of end of political days stuff when the family's primary advisors, because the political professionals are saying inconvenient things. That may be the most worrying sign about this whole thing to me.
Yeah.
The fact that his family seems to be the strongest proponents of him staying in the race. The Biden campaign's raised a lot of money, has a lot of staff. He's told you that already. He talked about how great the fundraising was on debate night, and all of that is fine and good. But, again, it's like if we're having to talk about this for the next 4 months, it is, or next 3 months, whatever it is a problem.
Right.
And it's not a problem that's going away for this president, and no teleprompter speech is going to do that. And I think that's where House leadership is landing also.
Yeah. AG, there's something else at play, too, because we've been getting reports of what Biden has said behind closed doors, to donors, to some of the Democratic governors. And he makes light of his performance, with comedy, with some of these very, very short jokes, saying like, I got to get more sleep. I got to travel less. Something is wrong in my brain. And then the White House has to come out and say he was just joking. That's not a good position to be in either, though, is it?
No, I mean, if you're telling jokes as a politician, I mean, Ronald Reagan would tell jokes, and he's probably the best comic of the modern era. But he knew to have a punchline, and the punchline was not Reagan himself. In the 1984 debate with Mondale, where age was an issue for Reagan, he said, "I won't make my opponent's youth and inexperience an issue in this election." And in doing that, he handled the issue, created a line for the ages, that kind of thing. The president or whoever's writing his speeches for him seems to lack the ability to do that. And the more he talks about it, the more he tries to explain it away, the more it seems defensive, especially when he gets in these really anodyne kind of gaggles like we saw earlier, where he's snapping at media. He's making wild claims like he's gotten more accomplished as president than anybody in history. None of this makes you feel like you have a stable presence in the White House or at the top of the Democratic ticket right now.
Yeah, AG, just lastly, you're a critic and a student of the media yourself. How do you think the media has handled this? I only ask because we've seen, several editorial boards at several different newspapers, national ones, call for Biden to step out of the race, I should say, not step down for the presidency. There was something really interesting, though, from the editorial board at the Washington Post yesterday on the 4th of July for that occasion. It's titled, "What if Biden Spoke These Words?" A 4th of July speech on kings, independence, and American resilience. And it's a editorial that goes on to say, essentially, he would drop out of the race in this editorial. That's what they are writing. They're kind of ventriloquizing if they were Biden, but they're not. But they want him to make this speech or write this out. I'm just having trouble, whether or not the media wants this, or are they waiting in the wings for it? What do you think was behind that op-ed yesterday?
Well, I hesitate to put the whole media in one bucket, but I do think some people want him to withdraw from the race gracefully. There's some aversion, especially in the left of center press, to Donald Trump for various reasons. And they want a Democrat in the White House. They're not particularly wedded to Joe Biden as that Democrat, though. But my question about the coverage of the president's mental state is: did people really just notice last month that he was having issues? Because if you're listening to his speech, if you're listening to the way he would talk really loud and talk really soft, all of these things, the sort of weird discursions. If you've dealt with people in elder stages of life, people with memory issues, it seemed like he was dealing with early stage issues. Joe Biden of 1987 was a sharp guy. Joe Biden of 1994 was sharp. Joe Biden, when he was Obama's vice president, a little less so. But we feel like it looks to me like he's in the third or fourth stage of dementia sometimes, and it's not all the time. I mean, he recovers and he delivers properly sometimes. But as president, you need to be able to do that every time out. You can't have your frailty being the story because especially in this age of the imperial presidency, it's everybody's frailty. It's America's frailty. It's provocative weakness.
Yeah.
And, I think that is what's got these op-ed pages up in arms. But I do think that the beat press covered for him for a long time for reasons that are inexplicable to me.
Okay, AG, while we have you, we want to move on from all of the questions surrounding Biden to some of the questions surrounding former President Trump, who has been, in the estimation of a lot of people who have covered Trump for years, very disciplined as of late because he hasn't said that much. He's been utterly silent. He's going to have some campaign rallies next week in Florida and Pennsylvania. He issued kind of a lengthy diatribe on 4th of July yesterday on Truth Social. He also issued this Truth Social post today as well on something that's known as Project 2025, and we're going to put up that Truth Social post, in just a moment. If we can go into what is Project 2025, AG?
Yeah, Project 2025, it's a policy book from the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank. There's all kinds of proposals in it, from phasing out the Department of Education, to making the Justice Department more subject to the executive branch's whims. Abortion restrictions such as the banning of a pill use for procedure. There's something for everybody in that. Making it easier to fire people from federal employees. So these are big issues. But the understanding that I'm getting from Trump world, I've talked to a couple of senior advisors to the campaign today, and regarding that tweet you've got on the screen, that advisor said that Trump speaks for himself with this. And he basically is not categorically accepting this Project 25 conservative wish list from Heritage. I'm hearing other things too, like Heritage people might be out in the cold in the Trump administration, and this is something that we learned in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, is that Donald Trump is not a doctrinaire conservative. When the pandemic happened, he spent heavily federally, suspended student loans, a lot of programs that distributed money to people for various reasons. He definitely ran up the debt. He didn't make moves to actually streamline government in the way that conservatives have wanted for decades, because a lot of these proposals that are being floated by Project 2025, they've been around since the 1980s.
Okay.
They're movement conservative gospel.
Sure.
And the sense I get from Trump world is that they feel like Heritage and their allies were trying to hijack their campaign. That's winning in many polls. And this Project 2025 messaging from Democrats is not new.
Okay.
Before the Atlanta debate, they projected QR codes, the Democrats did, in Atlanta, basically on buildings, to say this is Project 2025, trying to yoke it to Trump. But right now, with Trump in the best position he's been in his political career, he doesn't need this kind of distraction. He doesn't need to play to the hard right, because he understands, and his advisors understand, that right now Joe Biden's not going to get a lot of Republican crossover votes, and Vice President Kamala Harris wouldn't either.
So, I want to put the Truth Social post up again. We can read it. He says, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them." AG, also, the Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation responded to this in a statement on X as well. I want to put that up. This spokesperson for Project 2025 responding in kind, saying, as we've been saying for more than 2 years now, Project 2025 does not speak for any candidate or campaign. We're a coalition of more than 110 conservative groups advocating policy and personnel recommendations for the next conservative president. They go on to say, but it is ultimately up to that president, who we believe will be President Trump, to decide which recommendations to implement. Rather than obsessing over Project 2025, the Biden campaign should be addressing the 25th Amendment. So kind of a couple thoughts on this, AG, because I've gotten questions just from my own personal life on what is Project 2025, kind of the doom atmosphere that is surrounding it, especially amongst, non-conservatives, liberals, moderates, independents, about what it is. It's a framework. It's a guidebook for any would-be conservative president. They think Trump is going to be that next conservative president. And it seems like they're saying Trump could pick and choose from some of these policy prescriptions and platforms that we have outlined in what is known as Project 2025 here. But do you think that came organically from Trump? Or do you think that did come from Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita as well? Let's get on the offensive against this. This isn't going to define another Trump term here. Where do you think it originated from?
I think he may have talked to some advisors before posting that, the Truth Social, absolutely, based on my conversations. It's something where these ideas, they're conservative principles and conservative wish list items, but they're not necessarily popular with Republicans. Ron DeSantis was the Project 2025 candidate in the primaries, and he didn't win a county in Iowa, and he wasn't polling well anywhere else before he withdrew. I don't know what kind of appetite there is, for these issues beyond the, really terminally online kind of people you might see on X or something like that. So, it's smart of Trump to not get into the weeds with, measuring the drapes in the White House, so to speak, especially when he can make the case that President Biden hasn't been a successful president. He's left America less safe, all the things that he was saying in the debate, the things he says in the rallies. Any sort of election like this where you have an incumbent president is necessarily a referendum on the incumbent. We saw it in 2020 when, that was a referendum on Donald Trump. This time around, it's reversed. It's a referendum on Joe Biden. And I think that's a more defensible play with swing voters for Trump than, getting into the weeds of conservative esoterica. It's just,
but
I don't, yeah.
It is anathema to his brand. You have this group like the Heritage Foundation saying essentially, we have it all spelled out. We have it all written down. Here's what you would do. We'll hand it to you if you get the keys to the White House again. Trump does his own thing. He's his own animal. I mean, if that's just Trump doing that, kind of disavowing this, saying, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what I think is best for the country. It makes sense, knowing Trump.
Yeah, Trump's a cult of personality candidate. And, in doing that, he can talk about policy a different way. He can say, build the wall, build a great big beautiful wall, and make Mexico pay for it. And, while we understand now that was basically nonsense, it was effective. And, when you're trying to bring out voters, you can't get too intellectual. You can't get too theoretical because voters aren't there. What voters are noticing is, their dollar is worth a third of what it was when Trump left office. They're noticing in many cities a lot of illegal immigrants, taking up space and, taking up city budgets. They're noticing, a few years of the post-2020 sort of, what the wokeism that Republicans complain about. These are red meat issues. And, especially with President Biden trying to manage a very challenging foreign policy plate, what's going on in Israel regarding Gaza and Hezbollah and Lebanon, the ongoing thing with Ukraine, and whatever issues are to come with, provocations in the Caribbean from Russian warships. This is a time where, Donald Trump should make this a referendum on Joe Biden and ask the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Most people, unless they're having their student loans forgiven or something like that, are not.
All right.
And that is the case that the Trump campaign will make through November.
All right, AG Gankarski, as always, and through November, the operative words there. It's still a while. We got 4 months to go. It's going to be a long summer. AG, always fun talking politics with you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for having me on. You too.